So I heard you hit a new record of agents working for you this week, William. What are you up to now?
Yeah, to be precise, number of agents working on one task for me at a time. And that number that I hit this week was 11. I
Wow.
had 11 agents working concurrently for me at any given moment.
Wow. That's quite a record. So tell me, how did you do that? What were they working on? And what was the result?
So they were working on a pull request. This was a massive pull request, basically reviewing a change to one of our code bases. This change had been accumulating over a period of, about a month. It's a pretty massive feature, and we had been reviewing it as we went along in more bite-sized chunks. But just for a little bit more peace of mind and reliability, I decided to do one last big review across the whole thing this week before we were getting ready to ship it. And yeah, so what are agents? In this context, I'm talking specifically about Claude Code sub agents. And the way that I would describe it is, if you open up your AI prompt and you simply ask it, hey, can you review this change for me? You have at that moment one agent taking on a monumental task potentially. If you're talking about hundreds of files changed, like in our case, it's going to take that agent a lot of time to go through file by file and try to assess the changes for bugs or issues. So what I like to do is I like to use sub agents to help share that load across more than one agent at a time. So that's one purpose they serve is it allows you to work more efficiently because you now have 11 streams of thought working on your request as opposed to just one.
So now, do they actually work concurrently, and do they interact with each other?
They do work concurrently. They do not interact with each other, but the main agent will say, so the agent that's serving you at the prompt level, that's the agent that's responsible for synthesizing the work. So each of the 11 agents had no idea about each other. They were just grinding away at what I was asking them to do. And then once they're done, they take their work, turn it into the main agent, and the main agent is going to be what looks at every single result and then puts it all together.
So is the
But
is
I do
so the
want to
main
make,
agent, you're talking to the main agent, is that right? And then it spawns the other agents, or kind of how does that all work? And how do they actually return their work to the main agent?
yeah, the main agent is basically just your prompt. So
Okay.
whether you're working in Cursor or Claude Code or any of the tools, it's about the same. You have some sort of a prompt where you're going to type in your request. That's what I'm calling the main agent. It's it's the one that you're interacting with yourself.
Right.
When we talk about sub agents, these are agents that are launched by the primary agent that spin off into their own process and do their own thing. The way that they share work, I mean, that's kind of getting into the internals of how the tools work, but most likely those sub agents are just producing a file and then passing that along to the main agent.
So that's
But the,
transparent to you. You don't see that, like that's
no,
all handled
no, that
internally.
that's
Okay.
transparent. You might tell the main agent what to do with the result of the work. So you might tell it to synthesize, you might tell it to look for discrepancies, you might tell it to look for contradictions. So you do get to describe what you would like to do with the output. And that being said, AI is flexible. So if you wanted to tell each of the sub agents to write to a file or to send an email, I mean, you could do that. But if you're not giving it instructions, then it kind of stays opaque to you. It just the sub agents communicate to the main agent however the tool is set up to
And
do.
you told the main agent, I want you to launch multiple sub agents.
Yes. So usually to use sub agents effectively, you need to describe how it is that you want to break the work up. And one important point about this is the not all of my sub agents were the same. I like to think of sub-agents as a way to share work across different agents, but I also like to think of it as a form of specialization. So each of the sub-agents had a different specialty that they're familiar with, that they have expertise in. So that's one way to take a singular task that's quite big and not only get it done faster, but also get different perspectives. I mean, it's no different than if you were working on a project with a team and you might have a designer in the group, you might have a product manager in the group, you might have a marketer in the group. The best approach doesn't lie within any one individual. It really takes getting a group of them together to see the different perspectives, to brainstorm, and then you can kind of come to a consensus on what should be done. So in this case, we're reviewing code. So I might have one sub-agent that's purely looking at it from the perspective of security. Another one might be looking at it in terms of readability. Can a human understand this code? Another one might be looking at it in terms of a specific technology. So if I'm using Stripe for payments, one of those sub-agents might be a Stripe expert. So that is also kind of a secondary reason to use sub-agents as well.
Okay. Okay. Got you. So you could have you could have different sub agents working on different, I want to say branches, but like different parts of the same application at once. And so that's kind of like multiplying yourself, right? You could have them working on essentially the same thing, but from a different point of view or different specialization. Okay. And so like does this really move faster that way, or like how does it affect the amount of work that you're getting done?
Does it move faster? Well, if you were to take, let's just say you have a contract. I'm going to use a non-coding example.
Right.
Let's just say that you have a contract that's 100 pages
Okay.
in length. And you, before you turn it in, you want to make sure there's no spelling errors in the contract.
Okay.
So you bring in 10 people, you hand 10 pages of the contract to each one of them, and you have them comb through the words and look for spelling
Right,
issues.
because they're not dependent on each other.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So in that case, to answer your question, is the contract going to get reviewed faster? Absolutely. So that is one way to work with sub agents. Let me give you maybe the same example but different scenario. Let's say that you have that same contract and it's extremely important, and you want to make sure that you're not getting into a situation that you're going to regret later. So you might bring in somebody from the security team to review the contract and make sure there's no language in there that's going to result in your customer data being breached. Let's say that you want to make sure that your product can actually fulfill the promises in the contract. So you're going to bring somebody from engineering and somebody from product, and they're going to comb through the contract and figure out, are we making any promises in here that we're not going to be able to keep? And so on and so forth. I think you get the idea. So in that scenario, is it going to make your work faster? Well, it's going to take you just as much time to get through the contract for all of those people because they're all reviewing every page. However, that being said, the end result, you're going to be able to walk into that room and get signatures on it with more confidence because you know that it's had different perspectives while it was in review. So faster, not necessarily, but in the long run, the benefit is there. Now, if you were to swap that in for what I'm using sub agents for, which is coding, different perspectives, I would say in the long run does mean faster because missing an issue because of a lack of expertise, that results in a bug down the road that you now have to fix. So I would argue for coding, getting different perspectives in the long run does save you time, but that's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is just being able to look at the same thing from different angles.
Gotcha. Now, is this something that, so you're using Claude Code? But is
Yes.
this something that is pretty much supported by any sort of orchestration environment, or like what is your, like Claude Code, or if somebody's using Cursor, or if somebody's using,
Mhm.
I don't know, Windsurf, or anything like that?
Yeah, it's pretty standard across all the tools. I mean, which ones have it for sure that I can say?
Right.
Claude Code has this concept. I know Cursor has this concept. I know Codex has this concept. I haven't tried all the tools, but
Right. Of course.
everyone I've tried has it. So that's what I would say.
Okay. So pretty much anybody could have multiple AI agents working on their project at the same time,
Mhm.
if they wanted
Yes.
to, and you could actually spawn them from kind of your main dialogue
Mhm.
with the tool that you're using, and
Yes.
tell it to do that. Now I've
But
noticed.
but
Go ahead.
but I will say that um, these you can spawn sub agents. You can ask the main agent to
Right.
launch three different agents to accomplish a task. But when we talk about incorporating different perspectives and different expertises,
Yeah.
that requires a little bit of planning beforehand. So the way that the sub agents work in all the systems that I mentioned is they come from a configuration file,
Mm-hmm.
which is basically just a prompt, right?
Right.
It's a pre-prepared prompt that has a name, and that name is how you reference the sub agent. So the reason I'm saying this is there is a skill that you have to develop, which is writing sub agents. It's not something that you're going to be good at when you start right off the bat. Even within our engineering organization, our developers sit at different gradients of sub agent writers. And so one of the nice things about sub agents is they are represented by a file. So, for example, let's say this week I wrote a sub agent that became an expert at Stripe. And I know that one of my coworkers is also working on a project that involves Stripe. Being that it's just a file, I may share that file with him, and now he can enlist that same sub agent in his project to be able to assess, am I missing any? Are there any flaws in my Stripe integration? So sub agents, they're shareable. They need to be written ahead of time if you want any sort of a good result from them, and it is a skill. Writing good sub agents, requires that you learn what makes a good sub agent, and so that's part of the equation as well.
But you get like the an AI tool, like an LLM or something, to help you write a good sub agent, right?
Yeah, you're not writing them by hand, but how are you describing it, right?
Right.
Are you giving it the right material? Are you pointing it to enough reference documentation? Because if you ask Claude to write a Stripe expert sub agent, it'll do its best and try to make sure that the agent is well written and is going to be
Right.
powerful and useful. But that's not quite the right approach.
Okay.
I can give a couple of examples. It's very helpful if you give it URLs to documentation, because then it'll absorb that information and distill it in the sub agent. It's even better if you can give it code examples, if you can give it guidance, direction. You really want to make sure that the prompt you're using to create your sub agents has enough content in there so that the sub agent is going to behave the way that you had hoped for.
Okay, that makes sense. So if you were to create a sub agent, for example, to um, I don't know, manipulate Google Docs or Google Sheets, right? Um, and you just need it to be really good at that because you want other agents to be able to use that. I guess in that case, maybe you would write a skill, but you could use an agent that controls that skill, right? So, uh,
Usually, I invert it.
okay,
So typically speaking, I'll have skills utilize sub agents.
okay,
You can do it the other way around too, but for my use cases, usually, because what a skill can do is it can wrap around multiple sub agents. So if you're working on a project that involves, a few different external systems and you want to bring experts in on those systems, you might write a skill that orchestrates those expert sub agents together, and it knows how to distill that information. So typically the skill
Right.
sits on top of the sub agent.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe it's probably time to kind of bring this to a close, but I think it's worthwhile to help folks understand sort of how to work in this environment. This may sound really strange and bizarre and esoteric to some folks, but I think once you start to learn the language of agentic AI, then it becomes a little bit more approachable. So I think there are four terms that are worth defining. So there's tool, there's agent, there's skill, and there's rule. Um, so a tool would be something like a browser plugin or something that an agent uses to get its work done, right? And then how would you differentiate, say, between a skill and an agent?
Yeah, the line is blurry, to
Yeah,
be honest, because at the end of the day, all these things are just prompts. They're just feeding prompts into
yeah.
the LLMs. I guess, like, if I were to try to put a fence around the term, something that could be relatable. A sub agent is an employee,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't hire employees that know every facet of your business.
Right.
Usually, an employee is hired
It's a
under a
marketing
specific role.
person or it's a
Yeah,
developer.
and that role has responsibilities. That person, there's certain expectations about what they should know, how they should work. So I would say that, yeah, sub agents, you can kind of think of them as employees in your organization with a specific expertise or role.
Mm-hmm.
A skill is a way to tie different parts of an agentic system together. So a skill is more of like a guide, right? When you hire people, hopefully you have some onboarding material. They need to learn what your processes are. They need to understand how to get things done within your organization. And so that is what probably I would compare to an AI skill. So it's a playbook. It's something that you can run over and over and over again that has a nice short name so that you don't have to give it all the information every time. And that skill could be using subagents to get something done. It could be using tools to get something done. Really, it's just a playbook that's easily referenced by a nice, short, easy to remember name.
Yeah, I like the term playbook. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And then uh so we've talked about tool, skill, agent. We think that there's definitely some overlap between a skill and an agent. And then I guess I had a fourth term in there, which
I think
was
you said rule.
rule. Yeah, so let's talk about rules. Do what is a rule, or do you use them? I know some environments they don't really use rules that much.
So rule is not one I'm familiar with,
Okay.
just being within Claude Code, although I can probably guess. Yeah, it looks like there may be rules. It's not something dived into too much,
Yeah.
um, but that they're probably used just in other types of
Right.
configuration
So like
files.
cursor uses rules, and the rules I can set. So in the context of say BMAD in cursor, but I can set it like just in general when I'm working on a project in cursor. I can create a rule, and the rule is when to use a specific skill. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that the LLMs and in general AI is not so great at is creating images with a transparent background. For whatever reason, it wants to create them on a white background or a black background, or I think because it's been tricked by all those image fraudsters on Google Image that say they're giving you, a logo with a transparent background, and it just has that checkerboard gray background, so it looks like, when you
Mhm.
view the image, it's got it, but it's a trick, right? They want you to pay
Yeah.
for it, or they want your email address or whatever for using that image. So I think they've been gaslit to believe that the checkerboard gray background is a transparent background. I'm not sure, but this is my theory that somehow they've trained themselves on this, and because there's so much, FUD out there about this, that's what's going on. So there's a way to, uh, so when they create these images, they create it with one of these backgrounds, and I'm like, no, I need a PNG, and it's got to have a transparent background because it's gonna I want to show through what's on the website, and if somebody goes into dark mode or whatever, you don't want your website to look like crap because the images are now have the wrong background color. So I had it. So every time I would tell it to remove the background, it would add that silly checkerboard gray background to it and think it had done something. So I finally, after some conversation, and I think it actually wrote a Python script to do this. In fact, it wrote several Python scripts because it depended on what the original image looked like. But when I would tell it to remove the background, it would apply the appropriate Python script and it would actually successfully do it. And so I said, okay, this is great. You've done it successfully. We've got this set up. Now I want you to create a skill for yourself to do this. And it went off and it created a skill. And then I said, okay, now when I ask for an image with a transparent background in the future, I want you to create a rule that will use this skill. And so after that point, it always did it perfectly. So the rule is really just the context where it's going to use a specific skill. And so sometimes, like an agent might use that rule, a skill might use that rule that then accesses another skill. Like it doesn't really matter. The stuff just kind of can keep piling on top of itself. But that's a pretty important distinction.
Okay.
Is
I- Now that you've explained it that way, I think what Claude Code calls this concept is the memory.
okay.
So Claude Code has a feature where if the agent doesn't
Mhm.
does something incorrectly or makes like a mistake in choosing a specific skill that you had hoped for, if you reprimand it, correct it,
Yeah,
it'll make sure to tell you that it's writing it to the memory. And
yeah,
you can also ask it to write specific things to its memory,
yeah,
and there it's going to try to recall issues or mistakes from the past and not repeat them.
yeah. So I think that's kind of the same nomenclature or vernacular as OpenClaw, right? OpenClaw has those
Yes,
memory
same,
files that it
same.
uses. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, congratulations on your new record. We'll maybe next week we'll see if you get more than that. But
Let's push it even higher. Yep.
yeah, but I think it's going to be a long time before we see the limits of this and the limit and the limit to the benefits of using multiple agents. And I would just encourage everybody to kind of wrap their head around it. It takes a while to get the idea that you have these multiple things going on at once, and it can even be a bit of a stressor. But in the end, like this is a skill that's going to be critical for business people and developers going forward. Cool.
Yep.
Hey, well, thanks again, William, and we'll talk to you later.
Next time.